is also one that stood up with us around stop and frisk and other issues. So I know that there are some here talking about being mayor, but we've not got finished with who is the mayor. You know, I preached in Atlanta yesterday. James Brown's family came to see me. He used to sing, "I want to be the mayor so I could change some things around here." Well, he did, our mayor of the city of New York, who sent a fire or shot across the barrel's back at ICE and has stood with us in National Action Network. Let us welcome Mayor Bill de Blasio.
Happy King Day, everybody. Happy King Day. I am really, really honored and moved to be with you. Rev, you are packing them in today. We have a big crowd here for King Day. Look around you, everybody. Everybody here cares. Everybody here is an activist, a fighter for justice. Give your neighbor a round of applause. National Action Network, carrying on Dr. King's legacy, putting it into action every day. Thank you. Reverend Sharpton, thank you. Because I know you, as a young man, took Dr. King's legacy, it coursed through you, you believed it, you believed we had to live it, and you have lived it out every day ever since. Let's thank Reverend Sharpton. Now, Al Sharpton has a habit of saying the blunt truth from time to time. So let me just say something about ICE and this controversy. ICE is now a political arm of Donald Trump's campaign committee. That's what's going on here. ICE is acting to whip up racist fervor. That's what's going on here. This is not about protecting our borders, brothers and sisters. This is not about making us safer. This is the safest big city in America. We are proud of that fact. But that's because we all work together. We believe that all of us are New Yorkers. It doesn't matter where you come from. We do not ask for your papers to know if you're a New Yorker. If you live down the block, you're a New Yorker. If you're on the subway with us, you're a New Yorker. If you work where we work, you're a New Yorker. So let's stop this madness. This is all about trying to create deeper division in this country so Donald Trump can win an election. We're not going to allow this country or our city to be divided. Dr. King believed that we could all find a way together if we overcame the divisions of the past. So I'm telling you what you see coming out of Washington right now. It's a trick we have seen for years and years and years, but we're wise to it, aren't we? And we won't fall for it. This day is a day to really understand what Dr. King stood for. I want to talk about another topic. It should be urgently talked about, but it isn't enough of the time. And I want to take you back to the fact that Dr. King, after already saying things that need to be said on the question of race in America, on the question of civil rights, after already having created such a movement for justice, such a movement of conscience that he had many, many enemies, he then decided there was something else that had to be talked about. He decided the war in Vietnam had to be called out for what it was. Now, if you look at the history, many, many people around him advised him not to do it. Many around him told him that if he talked about the blunt truth of what was happening in Vietnam, that he'd lose a lot of support, that a lot of people would walk away from him. But Dr. King showed us what it meant to really speak about what was happening to everyday people, what was happening to their lives. He knew too many young black men were being sent to die in Vietnam. That's right. He knew that we could not turn around our country if we were caught up in an endless war in Vietnam. Dr. King in 1967 went very very near to here at Riverside Church, he gave a speech called Beyond Vietnam, and it was radical. It was revolutionary. He said we would never achieve justice if we were in the midst of war. He said you could not have justice while a war was going on. Dr. King was right. And now we find ourselves in a new reality, and it's talked about sometimes, but then somehow it's forgotten. We have been in a series of forever wars. That's right. Afghanistan, Iraq, and now there are some in Washington trying to get us into an even greater war with Iran. The dangers are unestimable. Right now we know over these last 20 years we've lost over 6,000 American men and women in the wars in the Middle East. And tens of thousands came back wounded. Their lives will never be the same. Their families will never be the same. A recent study came out that told us something that should shock us all. In these last 20 years of endless wars, our nation has spent $6.4 trillion on war. $6.4 trillion. That money, a small fraction would have given us as a nation pre-K for every child in America. Every child could have had that. A small fraction could have allowed us, not only in America, but all over the world, to end these horrible greenhouse gas emissions that are threatening our future and spurring global warming. Small fraction. If you took all that money, you could have rebuilt every road, every bridge, every subway, every park, and every school in the United States of America. That's what that money could have paid for. Instead, it went to war and death. Dr. King said in 1968 at the National Cathedral, "War plays havoc with our domestic destinies. Something must be done, and done quickly." And he said further that no one who has any concern for the integrity and life of America today can ignore the present war. Brothers and sisters, I'm here to say this to you because we're at a moment of decision, but it doesn't feel that way. Have you noticed with Iran that one day it feels like war is just minutes away, and then the next day you don't hear a thing about it? Do you realize that the attack on General Soleimani was the first time since World War II that the United States killed a foreign military leader? Something is happening that is bigger than is being acknowledged. And a war with Iran would mean the endless wars would go on literally for a generation. And that would foreclose any possibility of the justice we seek here in our own nation. I'm going to conclude with this. Dr. King, we look at him with such passion, such belief, such admiration, and we feel a warmth for Dr. King and his memory. But Dr. King could also be a stern voice. He could be a voice that warned us. And in that Beyond Vietnam speech, he said a simple thing. He said, "A time comes when silence is betrayal." We cannot be silent on the growing march to war in Iran. We cannot be silent to the fact that there are some in Washington who would like to see us in these endless wars. There are some who believe the endless wars will stop the kind of changes that we need. And we can't be silent about that. I will conclude with a hopeful point, and I believe it in my heart. Because when I've stood here before, I have been in the company of people who believe that silence is unacceptable. And I know the people gathered here today believe silence is unacceptable. We all stood up a few years ago and we said we would not be silent on stop and frisk, and now stop and frisk is gone. We stood up after the election of Donald Trump and on behalf of the rights of women held the biggest protest in the history of the United States of America. We are standing up right now against the voices of hate that are raging around us and trying to reshape our society. One good thing about New Yorkers, we are rarely silent. But we got to be even louder now. So brothers and sisters, mark King Day with a full recognition of what he called us to. He called us to use our voices. He called us to march in the streets. He called us to never look away from the truth. And the truth is, if they take us into another war, we will never be able to have the nation we deserve. So let's stop it now. Thank you. God bless you all.
Let us now hear from a man that has fought in the trenches and is now the Speaker of the New York State Assembly. There was a time when I was growing up, we would have the big three in the room and try to get a black agenda passed through the crack in the door. Now, when the three meet in the room, 2/3 of the three is black. And one of those strong pillars that has that three-legged stand on the budget and on many of the state progressive decisions made. That's why I don't do a whole lot of singing and moaning and clapping on King Day. This is about hearing on policy. Dr. King dealt with policy and law and used marching and protest to dramatize to get results. You just marching and venting, you are just bringing folks through exercise class. We want stuff done. Now, nobody does more marching and rallying than us, but what a direct result is what we want. And this is one of those on the inside that understands that we set the climate on the outside so that he could operate on the inside in our interests. When I first started 8 years ago, my show on MSNBC, a guy said to me, Reverend Al, I saw you down last week in Sanford, Florida for Trayvon. He said, I thought that you are not going to keep marching since you now got a show on NBC. I said, you don't understand something. There are two Al's that work in 30 Rockefeller Plaza. Both of them black. One of them name is Al Roker. The other is Al Sharpton. Al Roker gives you the temperature. Al Sharpton changes the temperature. Let me bring you the Speaker of the New York State Assembly, Speaker Carl Hastie.
Thank you. Let me first give a big thank you to Reverend Sharpton. When we reflect on King Day, the overriding message is always a commitment to social justice. And for decades, Reverend Sharpton was at the forefront. Even when he was standing out there by himself, people called him names, but he always stood up for what was right. And I'm gonna be brief, but I just want to tell you a little story and tell you why I'm so committed to this social justice agenda that we've been trying to do in New York. When I was around 10 years old, my family, we were on a trip, we were going to Disney World, and we stopped somewhere in Georgia. I can't remember, I was only about 9 or 10 years old. And we stopped by a park, and my father said, come here, I want to show you something. And my father wasn't really a man of a lot of words, a lot of emotion. But on the wall, it was where a water fountain was, and you could still see it was kind of vague and kind of worn away, But you could see where it had the different water fountains, where it had white and it had colored only. And my father just pointed to that and he says, I want you to remember this. And at 9 or 10 years old, I was like, okay, Dad, let's get to Disney World. But here it is now, almost 40 years later, I remember that time from my father to say that. And here we are 40 years later. We're in a better place, but we still got a lot of work to do. And I want to thank the Reverend for thanking me for the issues of social justice, because that is really where this country still has a lot of work to do. Because as long as we still have homelessness, we still got a lot of work to do on social justice. As long as we still have mass incarceration, we still got a lot of work to do in social justice. As people are still struggling to find a place to live and lay, and the income inequality is still so vast in this country, we still got a lot of work to do in social justice. And I'm finding that, as everyone said, one of the best things there's a lot of things that Dr. King said, but where you stand in terms of controversy in the toughest times, where do you stand? That is the true measure of your character. So that's why I'm okay standing up and trying to make sure that people understand why we did criminal justice reform, to talk about changing a 300-year system of having a racist and classist criminal justice system. And that's why I'm standing up so strong on that. Yes, and I know Latrice Walker, who's the sponsor, and other assembly members are up here. This is why it is so important, because incarceration leads to people losing their jobs, leads to homelessness, it leads to family divides. That's why it's so important. God bless you and happy King Day.
Congressman from Harlem and Washington Heights, Congressman Adriano Espia.
Thank you, Rev. Thank you. He says it right, he says it strong, he says it in English and sometimes even in Spanish. When he doesn't remember, I teach him a little Inglés sin barreras. English without barriers. So, this is an important day for us. It's really every day. Every day is King Day. Because injustices wake up with us every morning. So it's not just one day, it's every single day. And so we think about King, and we always think about this metaphor of the lion and the lamb, right? And yes, maybe he was a lamb when he prayed to God, and he prayed for all of us, and he was in the pulpit giving the message of the Lord to many of us across the country. But he was a lion out there when he was marching for civil rights. He was a lion out there when he was crossing those bridges and facing racist police officers and dogs and fire hoses. I don't see how you can face that without being a lion. So yes, he was a lamb, and we all look at his spiritual guidance and the word that he preached across the country for direction. But his actions made him a lion as well. And so when we think about today's celebration, we think about several of the issues that we face every day when we wake up in the morning. Every day is King Day. And one of them, I think, could not be any tougher for the average New Yorkers. Sometimes, we wake up, we in politics think that we should save the world, the planet, and that this is philosophy 101. When in fact, people they just want practical things resolved for them on a daily basis to make their life just a bit smoother. And affordability, right? Affordability. That word, English is my second language, so I had to learn this right. Affordability is ripping our city apart. And so when you wake up out of Harlem in the morning, affordability hits you right in the face. You know it, you see it. You feel it in your pocket. When you go to East Harlem, which launched the Latino experience in New York City, and you walk out every morning after you brush your teeth, you say, affordability hits you right in your pocket, hits you right on your face. If you're an immigrant in Washington Heights, and maybe you're working 2 jobs, but you got to pay $2,000 rent, and maybe rent a room, and be afraid that the landlord is going to find out and kick you out because you violated a term of a clause of the lease. Affordability hits you right in the center of your heart every day. And thank God we got a $15 an hour minimum wage now. It should be higher, I think. So I think King would have looked at this and would have taken this on. And affordability and gentrification is ripping our neighborhood apart. And I walk around, I'm from Washington Heights. But now I represent Harlem, so I make it my business to walk around Harlem as much as I can. Sometimes I want to walk with the Reverend hand in hand too. That doesn't hurt. And let me tell you, Harlem is not the Harlem that we may want it to be. We're not against people coming in, but we're about keeping the people that are there, that with blood, sweat, and tears made it Harlem. And so when you walk in Washington Heights, a working class immigrant neighborhood, one that I grew up in, and you see the stress of high rent, and now you got Starbucks and bike lanes and sushi. And where's my rice and beans? Somebody told me on my way out of the men's room that I'm eating a little bit too much rice and beans. You know what I mean, Reverend? So, affordability is ripping our city apart, is segregating it. Reverend Senator Jackson just said at another church that our school system is one of the most segregated in the city, not the country. Of course that it is, because our neighborhoods are segregated. Because black and poor people black and brown people are poor, and that's where they send their children to those schools. So yes, segregation is still alive and well, and on every day, which is King Day, we should take that on. Let's fight for affordable housing. 100% affordable. We don't want this 80-20 stuff. We don't know what that is. You know, that's like playing the numbers back in the day. We don't want that. I know that I used to buy a big rag to figure out who won, but it's not about that. We want 100% affordable, Reverend. 100% affordable. Let's keep it affordable. Let's save our city. Let's keep the faith.
I always wanted a congressman that knew what Big Red was. In 2004, when I ran for president, we said, what are we going to do about New Hampshire? And there was a young man who went to New Hampshire and campaigned for me to be president. He either was visionary or crazy. He is now the Speaker of the New York City Council, and he still has not resolved the question when he keeps coming up with all of these progressive recommendations. Either he's visionary or he's crazy. But he is one that has been with us a long time. May we hear from the Speaker of the New York City Council, Speaker Corey Johnson.
There's nothing wrong with being a little bit crazy. That makes you a New Yorker. I wanted to thank Reverend Sharpton for having this every year, and I was going to say, I didn't know he was going to say that introducing me, but it was 16 years ago this month, this January, that I drove him around snowy New Hampshire campaigning for president, and I have been proud to stand with Reverend Sharpton since that day and every day on issues that matter for social and economic justice. You know, Dr. King was a man who dedicated his life to, as he said, quote, opening the doors of opportunity to all of God's children. And I am someone who grew up in a little tiny town close to New Hampshire, 3,000 people, and in that town there were 12 units of public housing. And my family lived in one of those 12 units of public housing from when I was 9 years old until I graduated high school at 18 years old. My mother was my lunch lady at school growing up and cleaned houses on the weekends to provide for me and my sister. My father was a Pepsi truck driver who struggled with alcoholism. And I love New York City. It's an honor for me to be able to serve the city that I came to at 19 years old with knowing one person, having 2 bags, that I was able to come to a city and some of those doors were open for me. But we know that those doors that Dr. King talked about, it's becoming harder and harder for a 19-year-old to move to New York City now and have those doors open for them. And so it is our job to not just talk about the issues that we face in Washington, but as Congressman Espaillat said, the issues that we face here at home. And the affordability crisis that the congressman just mentioned is real. The rent is still too damn high. And when we talk about affordable housing, the question is, affordable to who? That's the question. And so it's easy to stand up here and just rail about those things, but you need, as the Reverend said on this King Day, policies and ideas to effectuate that change. We need to build affordable housing for homeless people who are struggling right now. We need to make sure that our public housing does not crumble before our very eyes. We need to make those difficult decisions and choices on not having the most segregated school system in the United States of America. Those are the things that we need to do, and we need to build affordable grocery stores in neighborhoods across New York City, because 1 million New Yorkers, 1 million are going food insecure every single day. So those are the issues that our city faces. And Dr. King also said nothing will be done until people of goodwill put their bodies and their souls in motion. This is a room of people putting their bodies and souls into motion on behalf of the city that we love so much. And I will end with this. We have a lot of problems, as you've heard, but I still believe, even with those problems, that New York City is the greatest city in the world. We are the greatest city in the world. We are the city that gave the world J-Lo and Al Sharpton. We are the city that is the home of the Lemon Ice King of Corona. We are the city that not that far from here, the Statue of Liberty has stood in New York Harbor for generations, holding a torch which has been a beacon to immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees. Immigrants are welcome here in New York City. We are the city that out of 8.6 million people who live here, 37% of New Yorkers were not born in the United States of America, but came here with dreams and aspirations for themselves and for their families. We're the city that 50 years ago last June, some brave activists rose up on Christopher Street and decided to fight back, which lit a match towards worldwide equality. We are the greatest city in the world, and as an openly gay man, as the only openly HIV positive elected official in the state of New York, as someone who last July 13th celebrated 11 years clean and sober from drugs and alcohol, my biggest accomplishment in life, it is important for us to talk about the struggles and challenges that our city faces and the struggles and challenges that we faced, and how we can turn that into policies and dreams for a better city. New York City is the greatest city in the world, but greatness is not guaranteed. Justice is not guaranteed. Progress is not guaranteed. It takes action. It takes ideas. It takes inspiring people. That is what Reverend Sharpton does every single day. That is what the House of Justice has been about for decades. And that is the struggle that we are reminded about today on King Day, but one that we must hold with us every day moving forward, not just in defeating the racist in chief in the White House, but also looking in the mirror and figuring out, in our great city, what can we do to have a more perfect, equitable, and just city? And I look forward to doing that work with all of you. Thank you very much.
Speaker Corey Johnson, one of the people that came out of a movement for social justice. He's been a member of NAN. He's marched with us, worked with us from his young years, and never stopped, and is still in the streets as he is the second highest elected officer in the city of New York, dealing with those in the streets. We are proud of him and we work with him, and on King Day salute him. Let us hear from the public advocate of the city of New York, Jumaane Williams.
Peace and blessings. What's up, House of Justice? How you doing? Very excited to be here. I think he just walked out, but I want to make sure I shout out Speaker Hasty and Latrice Walker for the work they're doing around bail reform. They're the primary reason they haven't walked it back yet, so I want to make sure we shout them out. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to reflect today on a hero of mine, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. When I was young, my heroes were Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Spider-Man, X-Men, and Batman. They were all heroes. I admired the way he stood up for people nonviolently, which takes even more strength in my opinion. Realizing where he was, recognizing his situation and how to use that in his advantage. Sustaining that strength, taking strength from God and the Most High and lessons from the Bible. It is incredibly disturbing, however, sometimes when I see people sanitizing Dr. King and misrepresenting who he was. MLK was an extraordinary leader who opposed violence, but that does not mean he was consigned to be docile. He was a disruptor. He was an agitator. He was a revolutionary. He was a radical. Those who don't believe in the cause sometimes will attack the tactics. There are people who want change, but they don't want to see the work done. They celebrate the work of others. They may recall the words, but they do not understand the meaning or the context. They remember the dream, but not the fight to make the dream a reality. Not the fact that many of those dreams were born inside of a jail cell. And when I hear rabble-rousers or troublemaking and all those things, you have to think of this man right here, Reverend Al Sharpton. And you know you're doing a good job when the people who don't like you and like you say the same thing. If something happened right now, somebody don't like him, they say, where's Reverend Al Sharpton? But somebody who knows who he is and want him, if something happened right now, say, where the hell is Al Sharpton? We need him right now to make this thing happen. People use this misinterpretation to attack modern acts of protest and dissent. Dr. King himself never condemned protest and dissent in the streets in the young people. And don't let them fool you. We got to choose between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. They were both revolutionaries. And by the way, they were both killed violently. They want you to believe that it is the way you protest, but the fact is, it is how you protest that disrupts the system. I mean, the fact that you protest at all is what disrupts the system. Every generation looks back on the previous generation with a different set of eyes. They believe that if they were there, they'd have the fortitude to stand up with the movement, that they'd have the fortitude to stand up with Dr. King. Well, right now, we are in a movement. Right now, that legacy is here to keep that moral fortitude. And the question will be asked a few years from now, where were you? Where were you when all this was going on? Where were you when there were children and babies being molested in cages? Where were you when black trans women were being killed with impunity? Where were you when tens of thousands of black girls are disappearing and nobody is saying anything at all? Where were you when there was a man in the White House and all he was missing is a hood? Where were you when we know it wasn't just that one man in the White House, but an entire party that is lifting up? Where were you when all of these things were happening? So if you talk about Dr. King, the time is right now to cement your legacy. Because I'm telling you, back then, there were grandmothers and people who had no college degrees that we don't remember their name, but because they knew what was going on, they hit them streets, and they hit them hard. And I want everybody here to be remembered in that legacy. When you say, what did you do? You can say every damn thing I could to make sure we came to the next generation. Now, recent events of the last week saw anti-Semitism on the rise, and bigotry has been on the rise in our city and our state. It was a reminder that the human condition is ever a work in progress. It is in moments like these that our society must commit to work even harder to find common ground and provide a space for healing and honest conversation. In the Daily News today, I recommend you take a read. I talked about James Chaney, Michael Sherner, and Andrew Gordon. 3 civil rights workers, 1 black and 2 Jewish men brutally murdered by members of the Ku Klux Klan in Philadelphia, Mississippi on the night of June 21st, 1965. This points to the historical reality that the communities have worked together to address societal ills. That means we must raise our collective voices together, not only to condemn instances of anti-Semitism, but racism and all bigotry, not one without the other, and create meaningful platforms to have dialogue to address the underlying causes of these incidences. We will not allow people to talk about anti-Semitism against bail reform and the black and brown bodies that will be saved. We have the ability to talk about both and push them forward. We reject that policies of division. And I have to say this, and I sometimes lose some people, but it ain't just Trump and it ain't just Republicans. This city is the most segregated school system in the entire nation. There's 70,000 people that are going to be homeless. There are luxury apartments sitting vacant while over 4,000 people will sleep on the streets tonight. There are Democratic governors and mayors across this city that have helped us get here, and I want the Democrats to be held accountable as too. This week, as we celebrate the memory and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, I ask my fellow New Yorkers to look beyond slogans, look beyond euphemism, stand for the revolutionary king, stand for the radical king. As he said, let us rise up tonight with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. Let us move on these powerful days, these days of challenge to make America what it ought to be. We have an opportunity to make America a better nation. Let's get to it. If you're going to speak his name, be about it. Some people got to keep his name out their mouth. Peace.
Jemani Williams. We need someone to move their car. It is a GL 450 Mercedes-Benz. You need to come give me an offering before you move your car. But move your car, you're blocking someone that needs to get out. Special, what is this, special parking? You have a special permit, 624-815. You're double parked, they need you to move your car. That's your car? Well then, all right, let's move on. Whoever's car it is, let us move it. Let us hear now, 29 years ago, when we started the National Action Network, and we began to form the founding board, Attorney Michael Hardy was getting ready to file the incorporation. There was one man that said that I will sign as one of the incorporators. We said, well, you know, you are in law enforcement. He said, I am in justice enforcement. And he signed as one of those that incorporate this organization. When I've gone through periods in life where we were under threat, he got black officers to protect my life and that of my family. So we didn't just meet when he started running for office. In fact, I remember the first time he ran and he was going to run for state senate, they stole his petitions. And he came up to, then we were meeting on Saturdays at PS 175. You think I remembered that? I remember how we all had to stand and be together. You know, people think that as you get older, Eric and I are older than we were 29 years ago, that you lose your memory. Like this morning, I was telling them at our National Action Network breakfast in D.C., Bill Clinton, as a young man, works in the bureau there, Eric, NAN Bureau. And I said, man, how old are you? He's 27. I said, do you work out? He said, no. I said, I'm 65 and get up and work out every morning. He said, that's great. You don't look a day over 70. So as I said, he used to work at the NAN Bureau in Washington. But this brother, we've come a long way together and a long way to go. He is now the borough president of Brooklyn and on his way to where, who knows? But he's been in the trenches and he's with us. Eric L. Adams.
Appreciate you so much. Appreciate the House of Justice. And, you know, nothing I think is more wrong than when you use your skills and your professional abilities and not let them reflect into your personal and professional life. I had a conversation this morning at BAM at our annual event. And I just really want you to understand, just in a brief context, life is about definitions. And I shared with the audience this morning, you know, there's a skill you learn as a law enforcement officer. You learn how to do investigations and you allow the facts to take you where they are and just deal with the facts. As they used to say in Adam 12, they used to say just the facts, man. And so the definition of crises is important. Everyone was talking about these various conversations that's impacting not only our city but our country. This country is great at resolving crises, one of the best on the planet. But the definition of crises in America is anything of a dangerous proportion that does not take place in the black and brown community. That's the definition of crises. So when crack was rampant, when in South Jamaica, Queens, in Harlem, in the South Bronx, when we saw young girls selling their bodies at $5 a vial, when we saw black mothers standing online to get into their public housing apartments that drug dealers were controlling, when we were painting crack houses and saying that this is a major issue, the country and the city said it was just an incident. But when opioids spilled over into the suburban counties, we went from something being just an incident to a major crisis. We saw the governor, we saw the state houses, we saw the president start initiating actions to deal with opioid. When we were carving highways of death with 9mm bullets through our community and guns were running rampant and coming up the iron pipeline from those states where guns were easy to purchase and those handguns were killing our children, it was just an incident. But when AK-47s and assault rifles went into suburban counties and started killing young children, it became a crisis. And the federal and state government instituted those laws to deal with handling assault rifles and AK-47s. People, the crisis of guns in America is not assault rifles. The greatest level of deaths come from handguns, but the victims are black and brown. Go all over this country and you will see who are the victims of guns in this country and its handguns. Let me tell you something. If any other ethnic group, children were failing at the level of black and brown boys, they'd be rioting in the streets. Every year, go to Compton, Go to south side of Chicago, Liberty City, Mississippi, Brownsville. The problem in education is focusing on black and brown boys. Either they have a mutated gene that they can't learn, or the system don't want to teach them, or folks are profiting off the dysfunctionality of the educational system of black and brown boys. It's not a crisis. We can fix this anytime. This is not a crisis. Doesn't stop there. Infant morbidity. Black women are dying, you heard it, 12 times the rate of white women. The entire country would be mobilized to address this issue if it wasn't black and brown women who are dying at this rate. But it's not a crisis. And let me check this one out. Let me drop this on you. Group of mothers came in my office. They had rat bites on their babies. Their babies were traumatized. They would wake up in the morning and turn on the lights, and the rats were scurrying out of the cribs. They were opening the cabinets and nitre coming through the stove. We're not talking about mice, we're talking about rats. And I said, I'm going to look over the country and find a way that we can start dealing with this major rat infestation. We come up with a device, we kill 107 rats at Bar Hall, and we start to move the pilot project into the communities where the trauma and the crises exist. Then we had these characters come up and say, how dare you kill these rats? What the hell is wrong with you? You are saying that the rats are more important than our children because it's not a crisis. That is why we're in this state. We are in this state because people respond where the crisis is. And the crisis, as long as in our community, it's not a crisis. And so if we don't change that dialogue, if we don't change that conversation, if we don't ensure we take the energy and spirit that we see in this room all the time, then we're never going to turn around these dynamics that we experience every day. It's a crisis that our grandmothers that were here in this city for years no longer could afford to be here. It's a crisis that over 100,000 young people are homeless. 85% are persons of color. 400,000 are homeless families. That is a crisis. But we have to talk about it. And that is what this is about right now. Not allowing other people to define and treat you differently. You matter. And that's what NAN is about. That's why I signed to be on this board. That is why I stood with this family. That is why we will continue to fight together. That is who I am. And I'm unapologetic. And if you know the spirit and energy of Dr. King, he did not allow others to be comfortable while everyone else was living in horrific conditions. If you are uncomfortable with raising these issues, then you just have to get over it, because you are not going to enjoy this city and watch the displacement of the people who made this city. You were waking up to gunshots and not alarm clocks, and you stayed. You were here before Starbucks. You were here before others came and decided they wanted to be part of this city. Folks are not only hijacking your apartments and displacing your living arrangements, they displace your conversations and said the things that are important to you are no longer important, and they decide what's important and what's not important. Go back to Iowa, you go back to Ohio. New York City belongs to the people that was here and made New York City what it is. And I know I'm a New Yorker. I protected this city. I have a right to put my voice in how the city should run. Thank you, man. Thank you, Rev.
Let us hear from the controller of the city of New York, who is a member here And always here, let us hear from Scott Stringer.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is great to be back here once again with Reverend Sharpton and all of you. I was thinking about Martin Luther King Day last night, and I was remembering the night that he was assassinated in cold blood, and I was just 8 years old. I remember when my mom and dad ushered my brother and I into our room and said goodnight. They were crying like many of the neighbors who came home. I remember when the record player turned on. I don't know if you remember that. And for the first time in my life, I started to hear the words of Dr. King. The reason that we have these commemorations is because we can never forget that moment. And over the last 50 years, we have been learning, analyzing, and thinking about what it means to think about equality. I'm proud today to tell you that my son, who was the same age today as I was when Dr. King died, came to me and said, I'm learning about a great man. A man who said that it's the content of your character, not your skin color, that makes a difference. This is an 8-year-old that goes to public school, and I thank the teachers of this city for making sure that all the children have that understanding. But if we're going to be true to the teaching, we gotta stop the politics. When I was growing up in Washington Heights, uptown, there were no real estate speculators. No one wanted to come in and so-called invest in the community. In fact, back then, as Bob Jackson knows, they used to redline the community. The kids played in Dykeman houses, and the schoolyard, we all knew what we had. Today, all of you in this room built this city. You made it what it is today. And now, people want to take the communities away from you, build luxury housing in the name of affordable housing. How's that possible? The way it's possible is we have now built housing that we call affordable, but it is unaffordable for people who live in Harlem and Bed-Stuy and the Bronx, and we have to change that. We can no longer rezone our people out of the city, put people into homeless shelters, and think that in the name of affordability, we have done that job. That cannot happen anymore. It's no accident that the rezonings are in communities of color. It's no accident, you could say it with me, that these rezonings are only in neighborhoods where there are people of color. I've served as your borough president, and I serve you now as controller. I have not seen a neighborhood where they're rezoning, not on the Upper West Side, not on the Upper East Side, not in Park Slope, not in Brooklyn Heights, because what they want to do is rezone whole populations out to make way for the Upper West Side, the Upper East Side, and Covington communities. So if we're going to think about Dr. King's teachings, and we're going to do the speechifying that we love to do, we also need a plan. We have to reinvest and double down on nature and protect the 400,000 people who built this city. We have to stop rezonings and gentrify whole communities, and we got to start thinking about what the next generation of affordable housing looks like. Mayor LaGuardia built public housing in the 1930s. It was aspirational housing. Mitchell-Lama housing came afterward. We had mayors who gave back abandoned buildings to community-based organizations. But in the last 6 years, we changed the game.
We said to the biggest developers, we will give you our land in exchange for building affordable housing. But affordable for who? So I ask you today, as we celebrate our children, as we celebrate Dr. King, the challenge for us now is to make sure that we truly build an integrated city for all people. And that is something that we believe in. That's been the core of the NAN principle. And the next time somebody says, how are we going to integrate our schools, which we must, we also have to say, we have to integrate our communities, and that nobody should be pushed out and pushed aside. That's what Dr. King would be doing right now. Thank you all, and God bless you.
Let us hear, I spoke earlier in introducing the Speaker of the New York State Assembly, and I told you that there are three legs that holds up the stool of government. Well, the other leg that has held up this stool, that has been more progressive and more forward-thinking than at any point I've seen in decades, is the President of the New York State Senate. Who would have ever thought that a black woman who don't bend, buckle, or bow would be sitting at the table, standing up for people that had not been stood up for before? Let us hear from our Senate leader, Andrea Stewart Cousins.
Wow, thank you, Rev. Thank you. It is so good to be here. It is so good to be back. How you doing? First of all, let me say, when I heard Reverend introduce me like that, I knew I had arrived. Because, you know, there was a time like, you know, he wasn't introducing me, you know, and, but Rev, I love him. Because we have, you know, we've come a mighty long way. And I don't take for granted where I have been and by whose grace I have arrived here. By the grace of God, I stand here. And I stand here with such powerful partners. And let me just give certainly all my friend, my colleague, your state senator right here from the village of Harlem, Senator Brian Benjamin. You know, I'm in his... And I know you heard from Senator Lieu earlier. You heard from Senator Bailey. I know I saw Senator Rivera come in right behind me. I see Senator Jackson right in front of me. Senator Sepulveda is here. So, you know, I have an amazing opportunity because I lead a progressive body of Democrats, 40 strong out of 63, 40 strong, 40 strong. And you know, I'm the first woman leader. That's what the Rev was saying, you know, because they never let a woman at the table. And I thought they was going to break up the table there for a minute. But again, I know that it was that time. It was actually past time. But I was happy to be able to shatter that ceiling because of the work that Reverend King had done to make this happen. But he didn't do it for no reason. He did it because he understood that the power of the vote, of the marginalized, of the disenfranchised, if it only could be gotten, it would make a difference. Because you're not going to have the same people who are trying to step on your throat every day keep going back into offices and you're just sitting there. The fact that we have grabbed the power of our dreams and put it in the ballot box is what allows me to be here. And to have a partner like Speaker Hastie. An unbelievable dynamic in New York State, that out of 3 statewide leaders, you have 2 of color. Okay? So what do we do with that? What do we do with that? You know what we do with that. You know what we do with that. We keep it moving because we don't know how long we get to stay here. But I'll tell you something, we're going to make history, we're going to make some history. I promised when I came to see you last year, I had just been elected majority leader, and I promised that we would, first of all, increase the voting franchise. We did that. We gave you early voting. We gave you early registration. Last week, the Senate did automatic voter registration. We have polling spaces everywhere. We get more polling spaces here. We want folk to vote. We talked about housing. We did the strongest tenant protections in the history of New York State. They can't throw you out like that for no reason. They got to tell you they can't keep your deposit. They can't just keep charging your MC. We did that. When we talked about environmental justice, we understood. You know, we weren't just talking about climate change, which is real. But we had to talk about environmental justice too. And so when we push that agenda, we push it agenda for this entire community. Because we know where these treatment plants wind up. We know where all the toxicity lines up. So we're not sitting there for that. We understood that women have been marginalized. That's why we did the first sexual harassment hearings in New York State in almost 30 years. And made some strong laws that says you can't do this to a sister just because she's walking, you can't. There's a way that we have to be treated wherever we are. When we talked about criminal justice reform, I said we're not about mass incarceration. We can't keep taking bricks out of the wall and wondering why it's collapsing. And we can't keep pretending that people should not be given an opportunity to get out of jail. And that's why we did bail reform. We had to do bail reform. And right now there's a lot of people, oh, how did you do it? Why did you do it? And they say, even with rent is like, oh, you know, talking about a crisis, you know, people are so upset because we keep upsetting the status quo. Because you didn't send me to be the status quo. You sent us to be disruptors. And every time we talked about bail reform and you talk about a Khalif Browder, excuse me? Can I keep babies in jail because they can't afford a couple $100 to get out of jail? Can I keep them in Rikers Island because they had nobody who could say, you know, here's my $1,000, please let him out until he has a trial? There's a lot of conversation about that. And I said, you know, I'm happy to have the conversation because everybody will say, we know it was wrong. For generations, we know it was wrong. But nobody tried to fix it. You sent us there to try and fix things. You sent us there to try and get guns off the street and drugs off the street and give our kids an education because Dr. King understood how important it was so that we could get the economic growth that makes our community strong. You sent someone who would disrupt the system because you knew it was time to do that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We're not done yet. 2020 is an important year. 2020 is the year we're going to change it from a national level to a state level, locally. We can do this. We must do this. People are rallying in Virginia right now. People are rallying in Virginia with guns right now. They're giving us notice. We know this. Dr. King set the table for us to be who we are and where we are right now for a time such as this. The legacy will only continue if we have the courage to stand when they oppose, to push forward, and to fight. The dream never included us, but it does now. We're not giving it back. 2020 and every day, live the dream. Let's keep making history. Happy King Day. Thank you.
We have the district attorney from Queens. When she arrived, you could tell people that does not come out of what we call the hood. Because one of the guys, I won't bust him, Andrea, said to me, where are we going to sit her? If you grow up like I did, and the prosecutor's in the house, she can sit wherever she want to sit. We might need to talk one day. I remember Attorney Hardy would tell you there was a businessman had a little problem in Manhattan, and some of the ministers went to see him. I know what I'm talking about. He had a car dealership. And we went down and saw D.A. Morgenthau and said he's an outstanding member of the community. He may have done some things wrong. Can we work something out? And the DA said, well, I won't ask for the maximum and I'll let him pay a fine. And we said, in the interest of justice, we appreciate that. The guy did it. 2 years later, he turned around and did the same thing. Came back to me again. And I went down to see Morgenthau. But this time, D.A. Katz, Morgenthau sat there, and I noticed one of his ADA brought in about 3 or 4 racks of evidence, Donna. And he said, okay, Reverend, how can I help you? And I looked at the DA, and I looked at the racks, and I said, last time I came to ask you for justice. I come this time to see if you got any mercy hanging around the office. So just in case, I got to go to her for some mercy for some of y'all. The Queen's DA, Melinda Katz. Give her a hand.
Rev, I don't even know what to say. I'm never at a loss for words. Reverend Al Sharpton, Nan, I am so happy to be here today. I am Melinda Katz. I'm the Queens District Attorney. So, let me just, first of all, thank everyone here today for having me as your guest. I appreciate it. I appreciate being back here after my election. as well as I was before the election. Always an important thing. I do want to thank Reverend Al for the work he's done on his fight for justice and everyone here throughout the years. I also want to thank him for standing side by side with Muncie as standing against anti-Semitic behavior, making sure they knew population here, African American community stood against anti-Semitism. And I have to tell you, as a person of Jewish faith, I am a woman of faith. And as a person of Jewish faith, I am outraged by those anti-Semitic acts that are happening throughout the country. But as the district attorney of Queens County and as a person who lives right here in the city of New York, I am also outraged by the murders that happened in the mosques in New Zealand. I am also outraged by the African-American couple who was killed in a parking lot in Kentucky. And I'm also equally outraged by that 14-year-old boy who lives in Queens County playing basketball who got shot by someone who was shooting at someone else. And it is amazing to me, sometimes the lack of outrage about it. And I guarantee you, as the Queens District Attorney, I am outraged. And so we are making changes in Queens County. We are building fairness and we are building equity. And I have to tell you, Andrea Stewart Cousins, Carl Hasty, you're right. It went too far the other way. There was not equity. There was not fairness. And right now, we are working on new bail laws and fairness, and it comes out of your house. And thank God for the work that you did on bail reform, and we thank you for that. And going back to cash bail is never going to be the answer in Queens County. So we are working on equity and fairness. We are working on a conviction integrity unit that I named before I was district attorney in December to make sure that innocent people are not behind bars right now, and there is a way and a mechanism for them to get out. We are working on to make sure that the way to stay out of the criminal justice system, because we all know how it is. As a mother, I know how it is. We need to make sure our young people never end up in the criminal justice system to begin with. And that means bringing people who've done state time into our junior high schools and our high schools, showing young people that there is a better path, making sure they know that people care deeply about their futures and that we have a system in place to make sure. You know, I'm sitting here with Assemblyman Jeff Aubrey here, who has spent his life on criminal justice reform, making sure to amend the Rockefeller drug laws so that people had a second chance. And that's how we do it in Queens County, and we will continue to do it. So I come here out of respect for Nan and the work that you've done, but also to assure you after I'm elected that justice will be done in Queens County. And finally, I leave you with this. Last year, when I was here, I spoke about my now 8 and 11-year-old children, boys. I got boys. They're a challenge. God loves them. And we talked about the fact that we always talk about Martin Luther King Day on this day every year. We sit around, we have a breakfast, they tell me what they learned, I tell them what I know. And we talked a lot about his different speeches and his different equities and his different challenges as he was going through life. But it occurs to me that my job now got started long ago with him, with the movement. And I do agree with you, Madam Senate Leader, that he set the table for us today. And he set the table for us to create the fairness and the equity. And the last thing I leave you with is this. As a person of Jewish faith, in any faith, it starts at home. And I give that message everywhere I go. It starts at home. You don't get to be biased and racist in public. You don't get to be biased and racist at my kitchen table and at my breakfast table and dinner table. And I do think that message has to be loud and clear from any place that we come from. It starts at home. Your children need to know it's not right. Your children need to hear from you what's right and wrong. So God bless all of you. God bless Martin Luther King. God bless the future of this great city of New York.
All right, we want to thank the District Attorney of Queens County. We also want to thank Reverend Al Sharpton. He's not leaving. You know, we got a lot going on, so he's going to take care of the radio for just a second. And we want to thank him for all that he does. All right. I'm going to come right home for a second because we have a great senator in the village of Harlem, and he is with us this afternoon. It's our State Senator Brian Benjamin.
Good afternoon, National Action Network. It is always a pleasure to be home. Let me first start by acknowledging Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins. You just heard her speak. But when I came to the Senate in May of 2017, she was treated terribly. She was disrespected. She had the majority and she should have been in leadership, but there were those who thought she shouldn't be in leadership because they thought she couldn't lead, she couldn't get the job done. And when she rightfully took her place as majority leader, working alongside Speaker Hastie, we had the most legendary session in the history of New York State. So when they tell you people of color can't lead this state and this city, look at Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins. Really briefly, you know, when I think about Martin Luther King Jr., something that comes to mind that we haven't talked about today is the word accountability. Martin Luther King Jr. was accountable to his community. When I think about the Montgomery bus boycott, it was not a one-day bus boycott. Many, many, many days of consistent focus and attention eventually broke the back of the system leading to change. Why do I say that? We live in a world now where a couple tweets and people think they did something. The truth of the matter is you have to identify a problem, you have to work on it, see it through to completion, and at that point you can clap and scream and yell. So let me say this. Look, last year when I came here, I had said that I was going to be focusing on breaking the backs of private prisons here in this country. Private prisons are one of the worst creations in the history of mankind. Why? There are people who go to job every day and get paid to do what? Incarcerate people, particularly people of color. That is how they make their living. And we, as New York State, in a range of ways, had already divested from private prisons, but there was two things we hadn't done. One, we did not stop all of the state pension money from being invested in private prisons. I introduced a bill last year, worked hard with Comptroller Tom DiNapoli, and I'm pleased to report this year that New York State no longer invests in private prisons. That's an issue that I saw, worked on last year. Now I can tell you this year it's resolved. Second, we in New York State still, however, through our banks, are able to lend to private prisons. I'm not sure how many of you know that. Right now, there are banks who have arbitrarily said, not arbitrarily, have decided to stop investing. So Bank of America decided to stop lending. Chase decided to stop lending, and some others. But that's not statutory. You get a new CEO, is a whole new story. So I have a bill in the legislature, which we passed in the Senate last year. We couldn't get it through the Assembly, but we passed in the Senate saying banks are not permitted to lend to private prisons anywhere in this country. If you have a charter in New York State, you cannot lend to private prisons. We're going to get that bill passed this year, and I'm going to get that bill passed in the Assembly this year, and we're going to get Governor Cuomo to sign that bill, and New York State will be finally done with private prisons forever in the state of New York. That's what I'm talking about. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the census, y'all. 10 years ago, my district particularly I represent the Upper West Side, Harlem, and Central Harlem and East Harlem. The Upper West Side turnout was fine, but Central Harlem and East Harlem numbers lagged tremendously, and they lagged in NYCHA primarily. There are a number of folks here, we know people in NYCHA, we know people in these streets. We have got to make sure that everybody fills out the census so that our communities get the appropriate counting and resources that we need to get. We have got more people and less money because we're not filling out the census. I'm glad we're joined by Wilma Brown from the census. I think she has, you have forms here, Wilma? Stand up so people can see you. This is serious business, folks. See her, and I want you to get forms and talk to every cousin, sister, aunt, brother, whatever you got. Let's get signed up so that when we look at the census numbers next year, this, by the way, New York State has lost population, y'all. We are slated to probably lose 1 or 2 congressional seats, depending on what's going on. Harlem and East Harlem have traditionally been undercounted. We need to say today, right here, on the MLK Day, not on our watch, are we going to continue to allow our community to be undercounted and misrepresented? Because we can talk about Trump all we want, and he is terrible, I agree. But that does not absolve us of our responsibility to protect and take care of our own community. So let's stand up today, let's work together, let's get counted, and let's demand and receive the resources that we need right here in our community. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Senator. And let me just say this real quick, because, you know, everybody that you see sitting up here and a couple of people in the front row, they are enormously important for you to hear from. But also for the people up here, the people are here to hear you. So as we come up, because I know we're crunched and people have been here a while, we're going to call you up, but be mindful that they want to hear everybody up here. All right. Let me bring now, we just had the state senator from the great village of Harlem. She is truly the queen of Harlem and a fighter on the front lines. She's our state assembly person, Inez Diggins.
Blessings, family. No justice. No justice. No justice. No justice. You know, today we're celebrating Martin Luther King, Dr. King. And 57 years ago, thereabouts, he had the March on Washington because of the inequities that he saw. And Dr. King was about changing policy. And he was nonviolent, as Jamani said. But he could be violent. And what he told people is, I'm holding us back. See, that's the key thing. He let others believe that he was holding us back from doing what maybe we might have to do. So he wasn't quite as nonviolent as people think he was, because he had a radical way of thinking in order to see to it that there was economic justice, social justice, in a country that said the black man was not a man. And I'm talking about man or woman. You know, he fought hard to change policy. And today, we're still fighting the same battles that we did. Now, my senator spoke about redlining. Well, you know what? It's still redlining going on today. Because although the banks may say they're not going to lend to private jails, they're not lending to you and I either. And yet they're on every corner, in almost every block, and they're not putting money, investing it back in our community. And as far as Wells Fargo, you know, the federal government, and we've had hearings, the federal government has had hearings with a congresswoman out of California. Do y'all know who I'm talking about? Who? That's it, call it again. Maxine took Wells Fargo on and is giving them hell every day because of what they have done in our communities. So don't get it twisted and think because they said, well, we're not going to lend to a private jail, that they're going to do anything in our community. Because our small businesses need to survive, because that's who hires in our community are our businesses, not the big box stores, because they ain't here. Macy's is not here. They talked about it, but that's all they did was talk and stayed on 34th Street. So we don't have the jobs, we don't have the economic money that's passing through the community. And you know something? That's what Martin Luther King was about. And I thank Reverend Al Sharpton every day because he stood up alone to fight for the same injustices that Martin Luther King did. And he stood by himself. When a lot of people laughed, a lot of people turned their backs on him, and I'm talking about out of our community. And a lot of people said, I don't want to be near him because he's bad news. And now today, you see every elected running up here every Saturday asking for support and saying, I'm attached to him at the hip. But you know, it's all right, because we'll take him today. They may not have been there yesterday, but we're going to take them today because we need to stand together united in order to get what we need for economic and social justice and fairness. We need to stand united to say hate is going to stop. We need to stand united together to say to Michael Gardner, thank you for what you've done at MTA, and I know you're going to continue to protect small business and see to it that we get those contracts that's rolling out of the MTA plan right now as we talk. Stand up, Mike, because this is a black man. This is a black man. And we don't give the credit. And if we don't give the credit, nobody else is going to give them the credit either, trust me. So, you know, I thank you. I thank all of you. Because it's hard. It's hard when you have no place to live. It's hard when we can't find a job. It's hard when a bank won't lend to us. It's hard when our small businesses are closing up. It's hard when we've got street violence. It's hard when the gangs are out here. It's hard when we have to walk out here and we become the strange fruit that's on northern trees. And you know what I'm talking about. Do you know what I'm talking about? Tell me you know what I'm talking about, y'all. Because we have to stand united, but we have to do it together as one. And you know, census is about money, census is about territory, census is about power, and we've got to stand up. And even though we sometimes don't want to do it, we got to fill out those forms because we need that money. And New York is going to lose one congressional seat. And I don't want it to be our seat. I don't want us to lose our seat. And I don't want us to lose any seat, but we're going to lose it. And we've got to work together, y'all, and stand with Reverend Al. Stand with him. I mean, like he said, he's changing the temperature. He doesn't report it, he changes it. And so, stand with him. Fight together united. Don't just holler and scream and complain. Fight for what you want. Stand up for what we need. Stand up for this community. Harlem is a community I was born and raised in, and I'd be damned if I want to see it die today. I don't want it to ever die. It's supposed to live on forever. Harlem forever. Harlem forever. Harlem forever. Harlem forever. Harlem forever. That's what I'm talking about. God bless you. Thank you. And know that 2020 is important. This is an important year. We got to get the White House. We got to keep the state Senate. And we're going to keep the assembly. God bless. Thank you.
Assemblywoman Inez. Assemblyman Al Taylor, by the way, who's also a reverend, but he is not to preach. Be Assemblyman Al Taylor. Short, sweet, and to the point. Amen, amen. Somebody holler, I got the power. No, I got the power. Are you sure? Let me take you here real quick, because he said I can't preach. I want to take you to Micah 6, and it says this. It's not a preach, I'm just reading something. It says this. He has showed you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to do mercy and to walk humbly with your God. So what I want you to do on this day real quick is remember
Dr. King. Got it. Now put that over there. Now I want you to remember where you were, where you at, and where you want to be. At 68, when he was killed, I was living in a home in North Carolina because I got burned out of an apartment and then Sugar Hill, which is now Washington Heights. Go figure. But what I want to tell you is you have the power. Stand up, be counted. Don't worry about 2020, the year. We need to step into the space and own. You want to talk about small businesses? When you spend your money on the corner, does that dollar leave or does it circulate? When you buy meat in the supermarket, is it fresh? Is it old? Is it dated? So what are you doing about it? See, you can listen to these great speeches. You can challenge us, but I charge you to stand up, be counted. When there's an issue, let's stand up and address it together. Don't point your fingers at what are we doing. I'm going to do as much as you're willing to do. I represent 130,000 constituents. I have 5 staff, 2 full-time, 3 part-time, and y'all know they ain't making no government dollars. But they are committed to transforming the lives of this community every day. And when I walked from New York City to Chicago, 780 miles, people said, 1, it won't make a difference. 2, you can't do it. And if you want to see Al Taylor deliver, tell me what I can't do. But my question to you is, what will you do with what you have? I got the power. I got the power. Use it.
All right, Assemblyman Taylor. Let me bring now the president of this great borough of Manhattan, Gail Brewer.
Thank you very much. I too want to thank not only Al Sharpton, but a huge applause for his staff and the people who work at MAN, because they are very, very special. I want to say what you already know, that Dr. King knew better than anyone that injustice anywhere was a threat to justice everywhere, and that activism could never be confined to one set of issues. We are interested in anything that brings the poverty line down, that makes sure that people go to good schools, that we have affordable housing, and we don't know no damn war. We are people who care about everything, and that's what's great about NAM. So I just want to mention a couple of things that are really on my mind. Number 1, I want to thank the state on bail reform, but we now have to deal with Rikers Island in the city of New York. We got to move her off Rikers. Judge Lippman was here earlier. We have to make sure that we don't transfer all the challenges at Rikers to the boroughs. And we're working hard in Manhattan, so let us know. Number 2, in the schools, we need a social worker in every single school. It has to be a full-time social worker, and it has to be somebody who's culturally appropriate. And I would love to hear more support for that. And I want to make sure that we have after-school programs in our elementary schools. We do not have enough after-school programs, and we work. And we have to be able to have our children safe at the after-school. I know we heard about the census, and on January 30th at Schaumburg at 6 o'clock, people from Harlem and all faiths are coming to talk about the census, and I know that there's somebody here, thank you very much, who's going to be working. Thank you, Madam Brown. The Women's March the other day, yesterday, was phenomenal. Anybody go on the Women's March? But we are still fighting wage discrimination, age discrimination, trafficking, health issues, and the list goes on and on and on. And we have to make sure that that creep in the White House does not get the best of the women's issues in our country. And Dr. King understood that, and so do you. I want to thank everyone who's working on affordable housing. And you know what? The people in Albany should know what a difference it makes. We have our district office on 125th Street, and far less people in private housing are coming in because they are getting support from Albany, but NYCHA is still a challenge. And I am nervous about the quote-unquote not privatization, but it feels like privatization to me, in terms of some of the ways that the 62,000 units are going to be paid for. I don't know what Dr. King would say about that. I think he would see that it was very challenging. So I just want to close with something I think Dr. King believed. Nothing is harder to bear than poverty. For he or she who is crushed by poverty is like one to whom all the troubles of the world cling, and upon whom all of the curses have descended. Our teachers have said, and this is important to me and to you, if all troubles were assembled on one side and poverty on the other, poverty would outweigh them all. Thank you, Nan. We have a lot of work ahead of you. Thank you, Dr. King, for leading the way.
All right, thank you, Madam Borough President. Back to Washington, D.C., very quick. Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney.
Thank you. Thank you very much to Nan and Reverend Sharpton and Derek and the whole team here for their leadership. It's a privilege to join you today and celebrate the Reverend Dr. Martin King Jr., a man who used the power of his words, the force of his dreams, and his personal courage to change our country forever. He brought more change to this country. He was never elected. It was the force of his belief and his vision. And he once said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And these words are as important as when he said it many years ago. And every day we understand the risks of being complacent in the face of injustice. Every day it becomes more clear that we must continue to fight to make this nation a better beacon of justice and equality for all. And one person who's never been complacent is the leader of this organization, the Reverend. And he has worked with me in 4 different areas. He said earlier that Dr. King talked substance and purpose and had a plan to get things done. First, the census. We've had many meetings here in this Hall of Justice on the census to get an accurate count, because if you're not counted, you're not represented. And the Republicans added a citizenship question that we found in writing. They added because they felt that immigrants and people of color wouldn't fill out the census and there'd be more Republicans elected. Well, we took this to the Supreme Court and we won. And we would not have won without the work on the grassroots of Nan and others. Secondly, talk about justice. We need justice in every neighborhood. And we need the 2nd Avenue subway going up all the way to the tip of Harlem, 125th Street. Well, now, thank you to Speaker Hasty. And when you see, thank him, he's added $4 billion to make this happen. And we should watch this project very closely to make sure the money is spent and that the subway is opened to help the people. Thirdly, there have been a lot of hate crimes. Well, now I am the chair of the Oversight Committee, moving into the direction of the great Elijah Cummings, and he would be having a hearing, as I am, the week we get back, on hate crimes, all of them. Not just anti-Semitism, but white supremacy, anti-black, anti-Puerto Rican, anti-Chinese. All of the hate has to be looked at, and solutions with education, lesson plans, teaching tolerance, understanding, acceptance needs to move forward. And fourthly, inequality. There is a growing gap of inequality in our nation, and we need to take steps to adjust that. One of the things we've done is pass the $15 minimum wage in Congress. It's sitting on the senator's desk. He hasn't moved it. We've got to continue to work to do that. But we need good data. They say the economy's good. But good for whom? They say we have GDP growth of 3%. Well, who's benefiting? So I have a bill that would break it down and show who's benefiting. And I think you'll see that the bottom rung is not benefiting, and we need policies that help wages and wages growth and equality. And we need to recognize that we have to be there for every election, especially this one. We cannot let this nation slip back into the dark, racist past. And we need to work for justice on the subways. When kids are jumping because they can't afford the fare, we got to give some way to help them afford the fare. And it means supporting our state's criminal justice and bail reform. No matter what tactics are implemented to justify rollbacks, we have to fight that. And it means fighting for the 1.2 million New Yorkers living in deplorable NYCHA conditions. So we need housing. Along with Maxine Waters, we have a bill that would put $13 billion into homeless and affordable housing. We can do that. We're fighting to pass it. And gun violence. As a nation, we have to combat not only the rising income inequality in our society, but the massive numbers of deaths. We had more people than days killed in mass murders in this past year, and we need to be able to pass the reforms that we've been pushing in Congress. So millions of marchers took to the street yesterday for the Women's March. I was there. But marching forward in Virginia will be hopefully the 38th state to ratify the Equality Amendment for women and finally put women into the Constitution so that we can enforce their rights, their equality, and fight discrimination. Amen. Thank you. And it comes from our like-minded brothers. I want to thank you all again for being here, for caring, for fighting, and Reverend Sharpton for his leadership and always standing up for truth and justice to the powerful. And we want to thank Martin Luther King for his beautiful vision and for working to change our society for the better. We can't stop now. We must keep fighting to make this great nation even more just and more equal. So become the change you want to see, and let's fight for what is right. It's never too late to fight for what is right. That's our Reverend Martin Luther King. God bless. Happy Martin Luther King Day. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Congresswoman. Also a member of Congress hailing from across the East River is Congresswoman Yvette Clarke.
Let me thank Attorney Michael Hardy, to all of my colleagues who are present and here on the platform, to the Reverend Al Sharpton in absentia, and to all of my sisters and brothers here at NAN. It is certainly my honor and my privilege to come and to address you as we reflect and we absorb what is a really important day for us, which is that of the celebration and commemoration of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And I think it's important that we, when we address Dr. King, that we put the Reverend up front. Thank you. Because it was his faith in the face of serious adversity, life-threatening adversity, that brought him through, that brought us all through. It was the divine that guided him, that made it such that fear was not an option. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. I'd like to thank you for inviting me to be here, and I wanted to share with you that as we gather today in honor of the man, let's also honor the movement. Let's also honor the movement. There were a lot of unnamed, recognized and unregarded foot soldiers that made and galvanized a movement for our liberation. And we owe it to ourselves in this moment, in particular, to acknowledge and to absorb that. It's great to be back home in New York because Washington, D.C. is a very toxic place these days. And I'm home to detox. Hello, somebody. It's a privilege to just be able to share with you a few thoughts on, as we honor our country's most iconic civil rights leader. We've gathered here today to be inspired, to be lifted by the life and enduring legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Many of us regard Reverend King as a graduate of Morehouse College. The very distinguished pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. As the distinguished Nobel laureate who won the Nobel Peace Prize for leading the most profoundly influential movement that shocked the conscious and rocked the world. You know, we like to own it because he's one of our own, but he set the wheels in motion for so many other movements around the world of liberation. All of us are direct beneficiaries of the life's work of a man who led a liberation movement, and we finally describe him as the dreamer, the drum major for justice, an outstanding man who devoted his life's work to the disruption and demise of Jim Crow, leading a highly successful battle for the very lives of the marginalized, the oppressed, the abused people from various and all segments of our society, irrespective of race, gender, religion, ethnic background, sexual orientation, and any other form of discrimination used against them. So I have a question for you, sisters and brothers, today. As we gather to commemorate the transformative contributions of Reverend King, I want to know whether you still hear the drum beat. Do you hear the drum beat of the drum major? Like you, I view Reverend Dr. King as a visionary who was so inspired by his faith in God, a faith that guided his leadership and compelled him to tap into a wellspring of courageous audacity that moved the nation and moved the world. He was truly gifted with the power to touch both the minds and hearts of the people and galvanize and unite them under one common goal of freedom for all. Do you feel the drum beat? And why is that important? 2020. We got the orange man. We got the orange man who is working at every level to strip us of our humanity.